Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I am here with Jael O'Hare, somebody I've known for a long, long time, and we've had many, many good discussions. So I'm really excited to hear from Jael about some ideas about gender and astrology today. So, hello, Jael. How's your day so far?
Hello, it's wonderful. Thank you. Um, I am just going to talk about some sort of background things to start off with, to kind of contextualize, um, then some more nitty-gritty ways that I look at gender and sexuality in a chart. And I think it's kind of necessary to go back and sort of look at those things, whether you're a member of the queer and trans community or not, to be informed in a way that I think, in my opinion at least, will give good results as far as being able to counsel people in these areas. So,
Okay, great.
yeah. Um, okay. So let's see. The first
Now,
thing
wait,
I'm going to
I
say
have to
is,
ask, how long have you been an astrologer?
I mean, that's sort of a fuzzy question because I've been studying it since I was a teenager, but I've never, and I do read a lot, but it all happens organically. I've never been like here's my placard, and it's not the only thing that I do because I just have always done lots of things. So
Okay.
I don't know, like a long time, but not consistently as the only thing I'm doing for a long time, like a couple decades. So yeah,
Okay,
um,
now we know who we're
yeah,
talking.
okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah, no, totally. So basically, like, first I just want to say like that what like at what I see astrology as in general is just like it's a set of concepts and practices that describe sort of the fundamental mechanics and building blocks of all of life, of the universe, of everything. And so, for me, it's important to recognize that astrology is not a belief system in and of itself. It's not actually about belief. It's like a more it's actually more science than that, I mean, I would say it is a science. It can be used as not a science, and people certainly practice it in non-scientific ways. But fundamentally, it is a like tool of uh, concepts and ideas that describe basic things like polarity, like active, passive, masculine, feminine, weak, strong, big, little, that kind of stuff. Um, and so that's important to realize, and also to realize that any practitioner is going to be bringing their ideological and philosophical framework to how they practice to a certain degree, because that's part of the thing. Um, but that sort of understanding, I think you do the most service to clients you're reading for by trying to be aware of your own ideological and philosophical framework, and like either to disclose that or to practice in a way that you are like focusing on sort of the fundamentals. Because even though when we get into the nitty gritty of it, different systems have so much disagreement about a lot of different stuff. One of the things that's really magical to me about the practice of astrology is that there are really basic concepts that are more or less universal throughout time, culture, space, and it's interesting to me that that exists. So, and I think that there's a lot of freedom, and truth to be found by looking at things in their sort of most bare essential form, um, which is sort of also the background for why I am not into the idea of destroying the gender binary. Because if you have a binary and then you have no binary, what you have is just everything and nothing at the same time, which sounds maybe nice, but it means you've now destroyed all language. Like if there's no differentiation, there's no language, and it's destroying the binary as far as like destroying language of gender, or saying that like this word can mean all things and that word can mean all things. It essentially abolishes the language itself to that is used to describe both like well gender on all levels, on a physical level, on a felt level, on all the different levels. So I am pro binary in that
Wow.
all things are some combination of plus and minus, male, female, masculine, feminine, And where the unique expression comes from is that everybody has a different spot on the polarity slider with like all of these other factors, all these different factors that then get stacked and create a unique person. And that also people are not static throughout time. Like we are emerging and arriving newly in an expression of ourselves that includes gender as well as a lot of other qualities every moment. So like to me that is it's much more infinite and more freedom to not try to like create a lot of new categories and new ways to narrow things down into solid things, but to like recognize that, yeah, like each person as having all kinds of different things. Because you can be a masculine woman who's attracted to men, or a feminine man who is gay, or a masculine man who's gay, or you know, whatever, you know, like the okay, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Well, what you're saying is actually kind of revolutionary because the modern, I think, queer theory, you know, I don't know, ritual is to say, let's destroy the binary. That is what most queer theorists that I know at this age and this stage are doing, is trying to destroy that binary. So you
Right.
being kind of anti-destroying the binary is a bold statement, like because
Yeah.
you know, and but I like what you're saying, that the binary exists in language, and without that, we would lose a lot as far as just even being able to talk about things being non-binary. Without that language, we couldn't even talk. But like, it makes me want to think of like astrology as, can we have 12 sliders? You know, like there's a lot of binary sliders, not just one, right? It's just anyway.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's like a really important thing. And part of it is because this idea, I think, is problematic for a lot of reasons. But one of the biggest reasons is because we've gone away from fighting so much about like for the inclusion of anybody. Like my feeling is anybody with any gender expression should be able to be allowed to exist and have freedom the same as anybody else. But it's sort of like we stopped kind of focusing on that part as much and are now focusing more on inventing and enforcing an ideology around gender that is like, which is the sort of destroy the binary thing, that is like meant to liberate us all. But that ideology is an expression of postmodern thought. And postmodern thought is essentially saying, in this case, like, you can't ever really know what's true. So the only thing that's true is whatever I say is true, which might sound familiar to some as the like fake news narrative, which is also very postmodern. Wow, all right.
That was
You hear that
exciting.
now?
Yeah.
Um, and so I am not a postmodernist. I actually think postmodernism is a nihilistic philosophy that only wants to criticize and tear down and doesn't think about what happens after you've torn the thing down. Like, where are we going? Like, how does this serve people? It's just it's just critique, but it doesn't have any backup to it, which is actually, I mean, it's very new. There's a different philosophical movement that's starting to come up that I'm interested in, or I feel aligned with, at least what I've seen of it, which is metamodernism, which is about integrating all layers as opposed to, it's basically a constructivist, or sort of like where postmodernism is just like, let's tear it down. Metamodernism, or you know, whatever you would want to call the next iteration, in my view, the sort of correct path to go is to like be like, okay, there were some valid criticisms, but what are we going to build now? And like, how can we restructure and not just say like, burn everything to the ground, the end, you know?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So
You're the first
basically,
person I've talked to who's said this, that they wouldn't mind keeping the binary and then building from there. It's like every other person that I've talked to is really in that destroy the binary thing. And I like what you're saying, is that
right.
if we just tear it down but we don't build something else there, then we really are left with nothing. I mean, you know, last night we were talking about feminism and we kept getting into like, we're beyond feminism because that's actually a binary thing. It's like, if you're a feminist, then
Right.
you're not like a masculinist, and like it's actually binary. But then we got into like, we're equalists, we're not feminist. But feminism was fighting for equality. Anyway, the point is like, I see what you're saying, where it's like we kind of have to have a binary to start dancing a little bit, and then we can like dance into some other structures with it, but it gives like a nice start point or something like that.
Right. Well, and I think another thing that's really important to me is truth and acknowledging what is. And from my perspective, they're masculine and feminine as energetic qualities exist, period. And the human species makes bodies that can make an ova or that can make a sperm on a physical level, or both, or none. But that is binary. Now, I would say that what thing you produce shouldn't determine how you're allowed to act, what you're into, how you present yourself. Like that's where I differ. I'm like, of course, like people should be able to have their own unique expression, but there has been a more recent movement to say that there's no sex differences, or that sex differences are unknowable. And that's emphatically untrue. Like, it's just not true, like on a biological level.
Yeah.
And I think that matters, especially because we are very far from having achieved equal rights for women and protections for women or female people in this world, not just women. And we're already ready to say, oh, there's no differences between the genders. We can just let whatever naturally emerges because all genders are no. And then what ends up happening is that people who have gender privilege are able to dominate the conversations, the ideology, the agendas, and the spaces associated with gender neutrality, because we're pretending as if gender oppression stopped happening because we said it stopped happening, but it hasn't stopped happening. I mean, hello, abortion in this country, So to me, it's still important to recognize that those things are real, and that there are people who have physical bodies that have certain oppression experiences, because the powers that be in the government doesn't care how you identify as far as what oppression they give. Like, the world gives you the oppression based on what the oppression is based on, not how you feel about yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's
So I
interesting.
just think it's important.
This is actually a big relief to me because one of the critiques I got as a teacher at the Portland School of Astrology, which was a very like anti, well, it was very pro gender theory and queer theory and all this kind of stuff, is that the students wanted me to abolish the use of the word masculine and feminine at all in describing charts, because they said that was oppressive language. And so I was using yin and yang, trying to like appease this and whatever. But I think I was with you and
Right.
I didn't have the language. You're just giving me the language now. I was like, no, but there is masculinity and femininity that exists in nature, or it is a thing. Like, by denying it, you're
Right.
not allowing me to dance and celebrate all of the expressions of those things. Like, you're taking away my ability
Exactly.
to dance on. It'd be like if like, you can't take away the number one and two just because you want to add five, six, and seven and eight. It's like one and two are also there.
Right.
You know.
Yes, totally. And ultimately, what I have seen happening in my own community spaces is that the push to do this has created it's created a lot of confusion, just generally speaking, but it's also had a paradoxical effect of almost marrying people's gender to their biology almost even more. And like, also by creating man and woman as gender archetypes that are biological, which is funny. I mean, there's a lot of things that to me are like hypocritical, paradoxical, circular logic inside of this like gender ideology thought. Like, I am a man slash woman if I say that I am, but also, like, sorry, wait, I can't even track it sometimes. It's like I'm different, but I'm the same, and I don't. Sorry, that's a
Well,
that's
I mean, as
happening. But
astrologers, we know something, which is that each of us is our own individual being, and that no two
right,
charts will ever be the same. And so I think we
right,
have the expression of ourselves through the transits. Like we might have yin energy come out on a transit and yang energy come out on a transit. So, number one, we're cyclically fluctuating in who we are. And then number two, we each
yes,
have a narrative maker around that, which is our Mercury. Like your Mercury is
right,
awesome. It's like you're making all this like really intricate narrative around gender, which I love, and I think, but then another person with a different Mercury might have not much to say about their gender at all. So I
right,
think
right.
astrology knows more about individuality than any of these isms or anything.
Right, right, exactly. And I guess that's another thing I wanted to say for practitioners is to recognize that like despite the pressure within the community to all everybody agree with this ideology, and if you don't 100% agree with it, you're a turf and you should be canceled and you're out and you're bad and all of these other kind of things. Like to me, like I've even heard people say that it's not an ideology, but I'm like, well, of course it is. All ideas about gender are some form of ideology. Like that's kind of how that works, right? So it's important to not get into spaces where we think that we are right and that like there's a religiosity to it, which I mean I was going to get to that a little bit later, but there was I've kind of been pointing generationally speaking to a few things, but I'll touch on this Uranus Neptune conjunction that happened in 93 and has like an orb that would 90 to 96 for like 5 degree and even wider than that for a bigger than 5 degree orb. But that particular conjunction to me speaks to a very specific thing that I've seen with people in that age range, which is very postmodern, and it's Uranus Neptune. It's like it's sort of this like rebelliousness for rebellion, just for tear it down to tear it down kind of thing. And then there's also this sort of like hive mind group think thing to that. Like it's rebellious, but it also has to do with like identifying your autonomy and individuality with this sort of like higher cause, like this sort of dissolution and like this very Neptunian kind of cause that is about nothingness and dissolution. And yeah, and again, that's sort of like tearing it down thing. So that's something that's interesting, and that's a whole other. I could do another whole several hour talk on looking at a person's chart in terms of like what generational influences they have in their chart and what those generational influences attitudes towards gender are, because that was happening in Capricorn also. So I would be curious to see research about that conjunction happening in people's like 11th houses when they have that feeling with in a more like group identified way, or if it's a first house thing in it and it's experienced more physically, or like if it's more of a relational romantic thing, or like it could come out in a lot of different ways,
Yeah, it's
which I
interesting.
think is also interesting.
It's interesting that you bring up that conjunction because, like, even if we look at non-gender parts of that subset of generation, like I've watched the body modification subset of that generation, and they
Right,
did a lot of like turning into animals, turning into full body tattoos of their vision. Like,
yes,
they're very postmodern into like I see whatever I vision, I will become. And
right,
it's like when Pluto went over those Neptune Uranuses, we saw them like unveil their vision of self, and like here I draw down that vision of self. And so you're right that the gender the interaction with gender, envisioning gender there is going to be anti-capitalist, anti-patriarchy. A lot of them and they had their Plutos and Scorpio, so they're like super like social justice warrior kind of like. Yeah, so I love that you
yep,
brought that up, and that if we go back, and I would love to have you back to talk for an hour on different Uranus Neptunes and just different generations and gender. I mean, we can watch the
yeah,
succession of generations, and I love that you bring that up though, because that's actually probably mind blowing to a lot of people here listening, that each generation, depending on their outer planet, has a different interaction with gender at all. You know what I'm saying? So it's
right, yes,
these students who wanted us to like drop the word masculinity and femininity. A lot of them were the Neptune, Uranus, and Capricorns, and they're like anti-structuralists. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. Exactly. And in a funny, paradoxical way, they're also dogmatically and sort of like rigid about their group membership to the ideology they do have. And they're very like, because I mean, Saturn is a naysayer, like Saturn is a reformer and a like taker downer of power, actually. Like obviously Capricorn is associated with structures and things, but like really like Jupiter is the king, you know. Saturn is like, you know, is the reformer, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And you see that more in the Aquarius side of things, but there was okay, wait, hold on, there's one other, oh, so that was one of the other parts of this I wanted to sort of point to, which is that um there's sort of a dichotomy right now, which is really these two ideologies that are saying, like the right wing, sort of more extreme, tradwife version of things is sort of saying like biology is destiny, like the tangible is the intangible part of your gender, right? And then the flip side of that is people are saying the intangible part creates the tangible. So like we basically are having the same idea, paradoxically speaking, but it's just flipped in terms of whether or not the group thinks that the tangible aspect of gender dictates the intangible side of gender, or whether or not they think the intangible side dictates the tangible side. Because, I don't like a lot of trans activism right now is saying like, you like trans women are women is like the common refrain. And that needs to be picked apart in terms of what does that mean. If what you're saying is that trans women deserve to be like treated in dignity with their gender identity, then I definitely agree with that, of course, and same thing with trans men. Um, but there is a subsect of people who are saying no, trans women are women, period, indistinguishable from cis women. And I actually disagree with that, and I think it does a disservice to trans people, and I think it just does a disservice to everyone to act like there isn't a differentiation somewhere where there is one, and that the move is to educate ourselves about what those differences are and to be more accepting of what some of those differences are, as opposed to kind of like banning the ability to even say that it's happening, which is more the move that has been happening, is just to create a culture war around that, which I don't even know 100% for sure if that even comes from us. Because like the other thing about this, which is a
Well,
whole other topic, is that like we're all subject to the outrage machine that social media and the internet has created as a business model to upset people, and gender is something that has been targeted for that because it generates a lot of upsetness.
well, and I think, okay, so trans women are women. That's trying to fight the denialism by people that trans women are women, right? Like, so I think it depends on why you're saying that. Like, if you're saying it like
Right.
that is, they are women, you can't say that their spirit is not a woman, right? And so, like,
Right.
we would agree with that. We could say that their chart is female, their chart is a woman, like they're, because the chart, like, what, let's say, so Ptolemy looked at four influences on a growing creature: genetics, culture, climate, and then the chart. So even if they're
Mm-hmm.
even if they're XY genetic, their chart could get, go in there and infuse and be totally female. And so that,
Right.
trans women are women from a chart perspective. We could say, yes, that chart is a woman. That chart is female, right?
Right. Right.
But that would be a denialism of the fact that the genetic layer, which is one of four layers, is
Right.
XY, right? Which that
Right.
makes a different plant growing than just an XX with a woman chart. Like I think I hear
Right.
what you're saying. Like you want there to be more nuance to be able to say, and though, like they're both true, and a trans woman
Mm-hmm.
is even more complex than a woman and more interest, like there's more to a trans woman than just being a woman, right? Like
Right. Right.
do I hear you correctly? Like,
Yeah, definitely. And I guess I think I would be, and I'll get to that a little bit later, but like I'm more interested in being very sort of like realistic and black and white about what the factors are, but then also, sorry, it's like, I don't know if I can explain it without saying what I was gonna say, but like, I would say, like, I don't know. I actually, in some ways, I even kind of disagree with this idea that a spirit like is a woman or a man. Like, because I think it's like so much more complicated than that. So, like, to me, people like sex is binary, in my opinion, or not. Well, I guess it's my opinion, but I think science says that's true. Although people disagree. Um,
It kind
I
of is, but there are X broken Y chromosomes, the X broken X chromosomes. There's XYY. Like, there's actually
right.
multiple sexes you can be.
And well, I mean, I guess what I'm saying with that is like there isn't a third ingredient. There's only two ingredients, and you can have one, the other, or a mix of whatever. Well, actually, everybody has a mix, but like you can be like far onto one side or far onto the other side, or have like a mix of whatever going on. But there isn't a third ingredient. There isn't like a sperm ova crossover part. And the
Right.
reason, again, that I care about that is because I do think that biology is relevant and it does matter. I do disagree. I think, hopefully, obviously, that your like biology in that one very strict way says anything more about you than the fact that you can either produce ova or sperm. Like, I think that that's all that it says about you. I think it's important to recognize, but it's also all that it says about you because we're just talking about the physicality of reproduction, and who a person is not determined by the physicality of the reproduction. And also, those are real things and they do come with things. So, like, it is an important layer to remain in the milieu, if you will. But when it comes to like how people express their gender, so like, um, you know, there are really, so this is something I've gotten from the Vedic tradition, and I imagine that it's somewhat similar in traditional, but like basically you have your most gendery planets, which is Mars and Venus, and Mars is like very male masculine, and Venus is very female feminine, and then and young. Those are both sort of like more the youthful layer. And then also on that layer, there would be the neutral, which is Mercury, which is sort of a bi-gender planet. But it's almost sort of like the feminine of the masculine, I would say, more so. Whereas on the sort of middle layer, Saturn would be the planet that's sort of the masculine of the feminine, and it's also bi-gender. And then you have the moon being the feminine, mature feminine, and the sun being the mature masculine, and then the third layer being where it's like these three planets are the least concerned with their gender, and they all have a little bit of an integrated blended gender. Um, but that would be Jupiter, which is like I think pretty gender neutral, but sort of more or less goes into the. Wait, hold on, let me throw all my notes down.
This is
Um,
fascinating.
okay, so yeah, so like Jupiter is sort of like technically falls into the male side. Rahu would be the feminine, and then K2, or sorry, North Node would be the feminine on that last level, and then South Node would be the um, bigender on that level. And the reasons for that are that, like, the sun is often associated with like authority in a sort of like large way, like in a king, in its dad. It's like, um, but again, like it has a very mixed quality to it gender wise. Like whereas like again on the far end of the spectrum you have Mars, which is just like very stereotypically male and masculine. And the reason North Node is associated with that sort of like higher level by gender, but like still female side or feminine side is because it's like, and this is the Vedic perspective, but it's like, it's sort of this like consumer. It like takes in, whereas Jupiter is like spread out and it like enlarges. And then the South Node is just like asexual. It's like aesthetic, not aesthetic, aesthetic. It's very like it's by gender. Like, so like Mercury is by gender in sort of like a more trans way, and so is Saturn, but almost less so. But then South Node is really just like, yeah, like, and again, so speaking of which, now that we have that kind of laid down, you can start to see how someone's gender could be like very masculine and feminine at the same time, or very feminine, or like kind of like very ambiguous, or it could be like sort of youthfully in their gender, or sort of like have a little bit of a like mom or dad vibe to it, or like, or again, have like the area that's more sort of like, yeah, because like when we're talking about like the nodes and Jupiter in it, these are much more I don't know, they're not so personal, you know. So it's like
Well,
a little bit.
I love what you're saying. Like you and I are, you're speaking my language, which is like each chart. I agree that a chart is not just female. It's actually like 10 planets of gender all mixed together. And like, but there are certain things like Jupiter and Cancer is kind of a total mama, right? But you can be an XY person with a super masculine chart and then have a Jupiter and Cancer, and that part of you is a total mama. You know, like so.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
sometimes Jupiter can take on like gender characteristics, like Jupiter and Leo. Doesn't that feel more a little more masculine or a little bit more yang than
Yes.
Jupiter and Cancer, right? So I think
Right.
some placements or like yeah. I mean Jupiter and Pisces seems kind of yinny, like feminine, kind of arty vibes. But it's like arty feminine, whereas Jupiter and Cancer is like mama feminine. Like they're kind of a different feminine. And one of the things I take
Right.
issue with just saying the signs are masculine and feminine is like there's actually like six different forms of feminine signs. Like Virgo is like a feminine, but it's like servile, earthy feminine. It's like, how can I help
Right.
you? I'm your minion or whatever. But you're like, it's more like bottom energy than anything, honestly. But
That's hilarious. I would slightly disagree, but I feel what you're saying on that for sure.
okay, please
Well, because I like the
disagree.
old, like the autonomous,
Okay.
like the idea of the Virgo as the virgin in the ancient times meant like that it was like a woman who was autonomous and not married. So it was like they were of service, but they were of service on their own terms. So it's like they served the community and did a like a role that was of service to the community. So like that part for sure, but like, but they also got to do that in the context where they weren't like being owned by a man while they were doing it. So it's a
Well,
mix.
and you would
But
know
again,
because you
that's a
are a
whole
Virgo.
new
Like I don't
cycle.
even know. Like you can own Virgo, and you can disagree with me anytime. Like
Yeah,
as
sure.
professors, I mean, I'm gonna start calling you the professor because I'm like, what am I with another professor? It's like, yeah, like
Sure.
professors disagree. They debate all the time. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
Students would fall asleep. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. But yeah, exactly. So there's like in this, and this is also why I this is the real reason that I take issue with this idea that it's like if somebody has feminine qualities that they are a woman. Because I again I it's not because I'm trying to gatekeep and keep people out of anywhere. That's not the point at all. And I realize that people have weaponized those ideas to that end, but that is not the end that I'm going for. And I think that it is worth considering the fact that like saying that having feminine qualities makes you a woman is like more gender essentialist and is like more anti-feminist than it is to just recognize that somebody might have feminine qualities because feminine qualities are a thing that are not inherently attached to your gender, or sorry, your sex, right?
Oh, that's really
Like,
profound. It makes me think about the Michigan Women's Music Festival and that
yeah,
how that deteriorated, and because they were trying to decide who was a real woman and who wasn't, right? And the
right,
problematic view there is that if you're feminine or if you're a woman, it should mean that you're XYZ or feminine or this or that. And then there's a lot of men who are feminine, but like it's just kind of like the problem there is trying to decide what is a woman and what is not a woman. Maybe that's the problem. It's like what if we took
right,
each chart and we said this is this chart and we just didn't say it was man or woman at all? Like, is that too
right.
non-binary for you? I mean,
I mean, like, what if we? Well, what's the context? I guess because it really depends on what the context is. I think that every single group that exists, meaning everybody who shares some definable characteristic, should have the ability to have that characteristic only space or time or whatever to be with other people who only share that characteristics. Like, we support Black folks having Black only spaces. Like, we support other groups doing this. So, like, again, I understand that people have done that in ways that have been really shitty and hurtful. And I think there are plenty of contexts that, like, including trans people in gendered spaces is absolutely appropriate. And I think that there are going to also be times when it isn't. And it is complicated to navigate, but that problem and its complexity is not solved by taking away language to talk about it and trying to pretend that there is no difference, because again, there is difference. And while my thorough experience being in the trans community and knowing a lot of trans community is that I haven't personally experienced like yeah, like I mean, I don't like this idea that like trans people are like predators that are kind of whatever is like obviously ridiculous. And also, if we create an ideology that says that anyone can say whatever they want about themselves and then instantly gain access to whatever they want, I personally say that that is a step too far, because it just sort of breaks down the fabric of shared reality and shared language and having shared definitions, which is like, sounds dramatic, but it's not, in my opinion, at all dramatic to say that that is the literal fabric of having civilization at all, is to be able to have some things that we have in common. So, like,
Well, I think
I
what makes
just,
it
yeah.
controversial is the closed space of it. Let's say we decided we're going to have an astrologers only space. Well, then people are like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I know what my sun sign is. I should be able to be let in. And we're like, well, you're not an astrologer because do you know what an aspect is? And they're like, what's an aspect? But like, then we like, how do we define what's an astrologer? How do we not? And see, the closed space of it makes it like this filtered situation. And I think the Michigan Women's Music Festival was controversial because it was closing its
Right,
doors to people unless they proved that they were of this female. So I mean, like,
right.
it's like closing any space is the hard part. But we don't inherently need to define like, are you an astrologer or not astrologer, because that doesn't really matter unless we're making a closed space. So that maybe that's the problem, is closing spaces. But of course,
I mean, I see, but like, we also have a thing now where we want it to be really inclusive about everybody in the queer community, for example, and in the trans community. So now in what I have been experiencing a lot and seeing a lot is people who would never have been considered queer or trans identifying as both, because the inclusivity level is to the point where it's just, hey, if you're not Barbie or Ken, you're queer and trans. Even if you've only ever dated and been attracted to people of the opposite assigned sex, you're queer and trans. So the reason that I have a problem with that is, again, if something includes everything, it ceases to describe anything at all. And we do need words to describe people who have marginalized experiences. And honestly, besides that, I'm just pro having words to describe experiences that exist. So, like, I get why it's sensitive. It's not something that I, as a trans person, ever thought that I would be out here fighting for, to be honest. Like, it's sort of like, it used to feel like a thing that we all kind of knew, but like maybe we wouldn't press too hard on it. But now we are literally in a place where we're actually asking, like, we're actually saying, like, we don't know the difference between anything. And again, we're saying that, like, if you like makeup, you are a woman. Well, what if we're assigned female at birth and you don't like makeup? Are you not a woman? Do you not get to be a woman now? Like, I disagree with gender. Like, we're actually gendering things more in order to prove that somebody is legitimate as their trans identity, or as the gender that they want to identify as. And I'm saying, like, what if we let people just have qualities and live how they want to live, but we don't need to, like, get everybody on board with a completely new way of talking and thinking about gender and sex and have a new ideology in order to say that it's legitimate. Like, what if it's already legitimate? Like, and part of the reason that I have some concerns about this is because of like, and that was another thing I kind of wanted to touch on too, is this idea of detransitioning being a like right-wing plot. Like, I'm sure there are some people who've been to a horrible conversion camp and or whatever, but like I've seen quite a lot of uh testimony, if you will, from people who transitioned really young and like decided that they didn't want to go that route. And I don't think that that invalidates all trans people either, but I think it's really shitty of the trans community and the queer community to say that anybody who has had a traumatizing experience with their gender care is like a spy for the right and that their experiences aren't real and that they're just trying to mess things up for everybody. Like it feels like in order to resist the wave that we've been attacked by the right, that a lot of trans ideology has shifted into this like space of being like even like the gender affirming care model. Like I never thought I'd say this, but I'm not into the gender affirming care model. I don't think that we should be telling therapists to say yes and only yes to people, because again, it's not a yes or no question. It's not like I think we've what I'm seeing, adult people were able to conceptualize of these things differently, and what I've seen in children and young people today who have grown up with this idea of like destroy the binary is like actually that it's like creating almost a stronger gender essentialism where like yeah, like I have a friend who's a therapist who is saying that like she's had clients who didn't realize that just being like a masculine woman or a feminine man was like an option, and that if they were gender nonconforming that they were trans and that should put them on the road to medicalization. And again, medicalization is the right road for some people, but like again, like to bring it back to the astrology part, if you're going to be counseling somebody about their gender, it's not a yes or no question. And there's a lot of different things which we can get into a little bit later that you should explore with them.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much because, you know, I actually still disagree with my friends who say that like we shouldn't consider people who want to detransition as being a failure of, I mean, like I just feel like that's a failure of the ideology shift. Is like we're trying to help people be happy for the duration of their life, right? And if we medicalize everything, it was that Pluto Uranus conjunction in Virgo generation, they're like, let's do everything with surgeries. And Lori
Yeah,
Leslie Feinberg was a Sun Saturn conjunction in Virgo, and that book Stone Butch Blues came out, and Leslie Feinberg's medicalization of their own body and then cutting it up with surgery was great for that chart. That's a medicalized like plastic surgery chart. But I
right.
don't believe that every chart should go through surgeries as the pathway to finding peace among in your gender. Like, and so I actually you're healing
Agreed.
me because it's like I'm actually sick of getting beat up by trans people conceptually because they think I'm oppressing people by suggesting that we accept that a gender could be a cyclical fluctuating thing and that we might want to
Yes.
consider the whole being before we start cutting things up. It's the same as like, you know, people have a transit and they'll get like a face tattoo when they're in a mood. And it's like, do we want to do something
Yeah.
that's going to stick forever when you're in a weird mood? Like some people would be
Right.
like, yeah, live as if you're going to die tomorrow. I'm the like live as if you're gonna live a really long time, like you know, and so it's like I'm not saying
Exactly.
there's anything wrong with face tattoos, but I'm saying that if you're gonna get
Right.
like a really radical one that's all over your face on a certain transit, know that you're not gonna be in that transit later. You're not gonna be in that
Right.
mood later, and you might, you know, so it's like with one-way door decisions like surgeries and things. We want to consider the chart. I mean, I'm an astro radicalist. I'm saying, like, if you're not looking at the chart when you're deciding your gender pathway for your life, you are actually missing something. Like the gods gave us an electrical diagram to go with our specific individualized self, and please
Yeah.
take a look. That's all I'm saying, you know?
Right. Yes, absolutely. And that's, I mean, I guess, there's a big idea around like, people know their gender, kids know their gender, and kids are trans and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm, I've really started to move more and advocate more for a move towards language that by saying gender nonconforming instead of trans, because the movement has been to say that trans is everything that's gender nonconforming. And again, it's like another area of trying to destroy the barrier between people who've medically transitioned and are like, have been like, I was assigned this gender or sex, and I am now living as the opposite gender than the sex I was assigned, um, to just sort of being a like catch-all thing. And then, of course, if you're somebody who says like trans means transition or whatever, then you're a medicalist and you're a true scum and you're forcing people to have surgery who don't want surgery and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, okay, I don't know about all that. What I know is that words need to have meaning, and that is just yet another word that has been pushed into an area where it is so all encompassing that it includes everything and therefore ceases to exist. So I think that if you want to come up with different words, then that's fine. I'm not attached to what they are, but I think that saying trans is everything is, again, mostly a problem for young people who are starting to live in a world where they don't realize that non-medicalization is an option. And I mean, I don't know, I was just reading the other day about WPATH, paid for this big study at Johns Hopkins to prove that gender affirming care was a good model, but the study didn't show those results, and they have suppressed the study, and it has still not been published or seen. But people who are involved in it are now talking out or speaking out about the fact that this study happened, and then it hasn't been released. And I think it's deeply dangerous and erroneous for the trans community to think that the system being willing to assimilate us into the system is a good thing, point like no questions asked. Because what has happened is they were against us and we had to do everything underground. But the minute we gain acceptance, we're gaining acceptance not because people have changed their ideas and they love us and they want to be loving towards us, but because it's finally profitable enough for it to be a good business model. And now we have things where like Wall Street is putting out briefs saying buy, buy, buy on trans surgery because a trans person is worth a minimum of $1 million in their lifetime. This is a real thing.
Wow.
So like I am skeptical
Wow.
of the system, and I've
Well, and
experienced so much effed up medical stuff myself, like
I'm blown away by the fact that you're giving me the option of non-medicalization as one pathway, because I think with my Pisces moon, and I don't have any Virgo in my chart, I don't have anything physical in my chart. I do everything conceptually, philosophically, spiritually. It's like that's why I'm attacking gender from the chart downward. That's my Piscean approach, and I just have a non-medical approach towards the gender fight. But I am an activist for all people to find a pathway towards, you know eudaimonia, which is true and complete spiritual happiness. Like, I want us to be
yeah,
truly happy. But I agree, I'm so healed by that there are non-medicalized, um or there's a non-medical option philosophically, that's actually a movement, it sounds like.
yeah. I mean, we'll see. I mostly have people be very mad at me when I say this stuff. Well, by people I just mean people in the grand trans community who are of this ideology, which is most people. I find that when I have these conversations with people who are not in that community, they think that what I'm saying makes sense and it's not that controversial to have a conversation. But if I have a little bit of this conversation with somebody who is in the community, it is usually a very tense and upsetting time because people really see any dissent with this ideology as being like pro right wing or like anti-trans or being turfy or all these other things. And I mean, I don't know. I guess people can think whatever they want, but I can also think whatever that I want. And I am genuinely interested in what is the most true and the most free, because I think like my entire practice around astrology is about using astrology as a reflective tool so that I can help facilitate my own and for others the most alignment with their true nature, which again for me is beyond a binary gender, but also has elements of polarity in it. So it's like, let's get into the depth of what that is, like
Well,
for yeah, like with the
can I
signs, like Yeah, go
Can
ahead.
I speak to your chart personally or no?
Yeah, no, go for it.
Okay, because I think it's interesting because you're a Pisces rising with a Virgo sun, and so you're actually holding space for both. Like the spiritual approach to the chart. Like let's look at your chart, or let's look at your gender from a chart perspective and a spiritual perspective, and let's look at it from a surgical and medical and physical perspective, and let's just hold space for
Hmm.
both. And I think can't that the boat
Yeah,
can't the ship go down with both sides running forward? I mean, it doesn't have to be
right.
the other.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and again, that goes back to that idea of the sort of like tangible creating the intangible or the intangible creating the tangible. And which one is it? Is it either or? And I'm saying it's not either or. They both exist. They both have validity. And to me, the idea is about reflecting on the true nature of yourself and like and yeah, and becoming in the highest alignment, like fight like. And that's what I love about astrology is it can show you, like, you have an area that's a problem for you, you can see how that's a problem, like the story is written there. And also through remediation, thank you to you for being a leader in that department, one can figure out how to shift that energy into something else. So again, for some people that will be a medical route, but there are so many different factors into what makes somebody have different gendered feelings, and there's also a difference between, like, there's been, I think, an uptick in people who identify with transness because they reject all gender and that they are rejecting being pigeonholed into a gender, as opposed to being like, I identify strongly with this gender that I'm like not supposed to have, which is like, that would be more my experience. Like I love and honor my feminine qualities, but have typically kind of come across in a more masculine way, you
Mhm.
know? And for me, a lot of the things that I have like to do in this roles that I like to occupy kind of fall under a more masculine category. And so it like has felt more aligned for me to like pursue living my life in a certain way and presenting a certain way, because that feels like alignment for me. But like that was a going toward thing less than it was a rejecting of. And actually, that was something I struggled with for a long time, because especially as a like, I was a young person in the 90s. Like I like very much a feminist and like very much somebody who didn't want to disavow being female, even though being female has been painful for me in a lot of different ways. And it has caused a lot of confusion and like, frustrating things. And there's a lot of upsetting or like, oppressive or like shitty experiences that I've had in my life that are misogyny and that had to do with my gender. And so when I was making the decision about if I wanted to medically transition or not, because frankly, I more or less presented as male or masculine since I was a kid. Like, I mean,
Mm.
I don't know. I really was not all that all over the place. If anything, the only confusion about my gender representation has to do with the fact that my male role models were like long-haired hippie dudes who like wrote poems about the Kundalini, like like, so there was like a little feminine vibe in there, um, but yeah, I don't know. Like, oh shoot, I lost my train of thought.
Well,
Yeah, it was very important to me to get to a place where I had healed certain parts of me that I knew were wounds and that I knew were just resisting certain things, in order to feel like my medical transition was me moving toward alignment as opposed to running away from something, which again is something that as an astrologer you could explore with a person in their chart. Like things like, because autism, by the way, is another, really, the amount of people who are autistic and trans, the overlap is huge, like
interesting.
huge, huge, huge. And I don't, like, again, I sometimes, I guess people are using that as a reason to say people aren't trans. I don't agree with that either. But it's an important thing to understand that neurodivergence is a factor in how somebody experiences their gender, and to like again explore that and explore how that milieu is there, and not to, yeah, be
Yeah.
like black or white about
Well,
it.
So I hate to stop talking to you because this is actually such a great conversation and you're a genius, and I really hope that you'll come back and have another hour with me maybe we can get into how you do look at a chart as far as gender goes, because I think we did a lot
Yeah,
of.
I know. I'm like, there's like 4 more pages here. I'm so
Okay, okay. Well,
sorry.
you know what? You and I could meet for five
Yes,
episodes or
sure,
6 episodes. Like,
sure.
it's like I have no problem spending the time with you because this is actually what I've been craving to do for a long time, is to talk with somebody who's really thinking deeply about the interface between astrology and gender. And you're unpacking gender on these huge levels. I mean, your Mercury is rad, and I think, and then also you bring in, the astrology really well. So will you be willing to talk with me again and again until we've fleshed out all of our ideas?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm sorry we have to
I
stop at the
appreciate
hour.
it. Yeah, no, and it's, I know I can really, I definitely am, it's that Spica with that whole stellium there.
Oh
But,
yeah, I love your Mercury. And the only frustration that we're having right now is that our conversation is rich with tension and wants to go on longer, and that's actually a good problem to have.
yes,
I mean, the only thing I'm
yeah.
going to do is I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to render the
Hmm.
video and post it, but also I'm going to make sure to
Yeah.
email you and set up our next time, because the next thing I want to
Great.
hear from you is what is your approach, since we've unpacked the gender layer a little bit, what is your approach to
Great.
looking at gender in the chart? Would that be a good?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Because there's some juicy stuff there and it's a little more practical also. So,
All right, well, and then we can talk about gender and autism in another episode, and we got a lot of episodes. So thank you,
absolutely.
Jael. I'm going to stop the recording.
Yes.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Like and subscribe if you
Peace.
want to see more of this. All right.